The frontier remembered its outlaws. It printed their names on wanted posters. It published their exploits in dime novels. It named saloons and streets after them in the towns they had terrorized. The legend of the American West is populated almost exclusively by the men who broke the law, rather than the men who enforced it. And the few lawmen the legend does remember are the famous ones, the Earps and Hickoks and Garretts. Men whose names became attached to specific events that made good copy in the Eastern newspapers. But behind those names, operating in territories so vast they could not be crossed in a week of hard riding, in jurisdictions so lawless they buried a deputy marshal every few months, there were other men. Men who arrested more criminals in a single career than most sheriffs saw in a generation. Men who served so long and so effectively that the outlaws they hunted feared their names the way other men feared death. Men who used the law as a weapon with such skill that it was sometimes difficult to tell, standing at a distance, which side of it they were on. This is American Old West Tales. Subscribe now, because what follows is the complete account of the frontier's forgotten lawmen. In 1891, 3 deputy United States Marshals working under Judge Isaac Parker's court in Fort Smith, Arkansas, formed an alliance that the Indian Territory had never seen, and has never seen since. Their names were Heck Thomas, Chris Madsen, and Bill Tillman. The territory knew them as the 3 Guardsmen. Over the following decade, they were credited with the capture of more than 300 outlaws and the dismantling of every major criminal gang operating across what would become the state of Oklahoma. They were not the same kind of lawman. Heck Thomas had gone to war as a Confederate Army courier at the age of 12, carried dispatches at the Second Battle of Bull Run, was entrusted by General Robert E. Lee himself with the horse and equipment of a fallen Union general, and ordered to carry them through the lines to the widow. He became an Atlanta police officer at 17. He guarded express cars on the Houston and Texas Central Railroad, and in March 1878, when Sam Bass and his gang robbed the train, Thomas had hidden the real payroll in a stove and put a dummy stash in the safe. Bass got nothing, and Thomas collected a $200 award for his resourcefulness. He became a deputy marshal in 1886 and delivered 41 prisoners to Fort Smith in a single trip, the largest single group of felons ever brought to that court in one journey. The Daltons feared him specifically. Emmett Dalton, the only surviving member after Coffeyville, said years later from prison that Heck Thomas's relentless pursuit was the direct reason his gang attempted 2 simultaneous bank robberies in Coffeyville, Kansas, in October 1892. They wanted to make one enormous score and leave the territory before Thomas could close in. It did not work. Bob and Grat Dalton died in the street. Emmett took 11 bullets and survived. Heck Thomas rode to Coffeyville afterward and identified the bodies for the Wells Fargo Company. He had tracked men he once called colleagues. Bob and Grat had themselves been deputy marshals. Without allowing prior friendship to alter the direction of his pursuit by a single degree. In August 1896, Thomas led the posse that finally cornered Bill Doolin near Lawton, Oklahoma. Doolin was offered a chance to surrender. He answered with his Winchester. Thomas's rifle and his deputy's shotgun fired simultaneously, and Doolin was dead before the echo reached the tree line. Thomas was wounded 6 times in his career. His first wife left him, unable to bear the absences and the constant danger. He met his second wife, Mattie, while recovering from gunshot wounds in Tulsa. He was 59 years old when his health finally forced his retirement. He died in 1912 of Bright's disease. Chris Madsen was Danish-born, had served in the French Foreign Legion, had fought in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, and had immigrated to the United States and enlisted in the United States Army, serving in campaigns against the Comanche, the Kiowa, and the Sioux before becoming a deputy marshal in 1891. He spoke 6 languages. He was methodical in ways that the more instinctive Thomas was not. Building files, documenting movements, assembling intelligence before riding rather than riding and improvising. Where Thomas ran on conviction and nerve, Madsen ran on information. Together they covered ground that neither could have covered alone. Bill Tilghman was the most decorated of the 3 and the longest lived, surviving into the automobile era in a way that neither of the others did. He had been a buffalo hunter, a city marshal of Dodge City, and a deputy marshal under Parker, and he brought to the work a quality that Thomas and Madsen did not always share. Patience of a kind that could sit on a problem for months and then move when the moment was exactly right. In 1895, he tracked Bill Doolin across Oklahoma Territory and into Kansas. Found him at a hot springs resort in Eureka disguised as a preacher. Walked up behind him, pinned his arms and disarmed him before he could draw. He took Bill Doolin alive when every other lawman in the territory had assumed that taking Doolin alive was not how the story would end. Tilghman was still working in 1924. He was 69 years old and serving as marshal of Cromwell, Oklahoma, a boomtown oil settlement that needed a specific kind of man to hold it together. On November 1, 1924, a drunk prohibition officer named Wiley Lynn shot him in the street. He was buried with honors that stretched across the state. 300 miles of Oklahoma road carried his funeral procession. Frank Canton was a respected Wyoming sheriff, a deputy marshal under Judge Isaac Parker, an adjutant general of the Oklahoma National Guard, and a well-regarded frontier lawman whose career spanned 4 decades and 2 territories. Frank Canton did not exist. His name was Josiah Horner. He was born in Indiana in 1849 and had moved to Texas as a child. In 1871, at the age of 22, he began robbing banks and rustling cattle across the Texas frontier. On October 10, 1874, he shot 2 Buffalo soldiers during a gunfight, killing one. In 1877, he was jailed for robbing a bank in Comanche, Texas. He escaped. He was captured again. He was sentenced to 10 years. Served concurrently with another 10-year sentence from a separate robbery. He escaped from the Huntsville Penitentiary, drove a cattle herd north to Nebraska, crossed the state line, crossed out of his name and became Frank M. Canton. He immediately became a lawman. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association hired him as a stock detective in 1880. He was elected sheriff of Johnson County, Wyoming in 1882 and served 2 successful terms. He trailed the E.O. Stewart gang for weeks through Wyoming winter, arresting them at a remote ranch in 40 below zero temperatures. He pursued Teton Jackson, a horse thief operating across Idaho, Nevada, and Utah, and brought him in. He built a genuine reputation in Johnson County as exactly the kind of man who understood the criminal mind because, in every practical sense, he had inhabited it. He also participated in the murder of 2 men before the Johnson County War of 1892, and organized the invasion that killed Nate Champion and Nick Ray on April 9th of that year. He fled Wyoming after the invasion failed. He left his wife, his children, and a county that had given him its trust and its badge. In 1894, Josiah Horner walked into the office of Texas Governor James Hogg, identified himself, confessed to the crimes of his youth, and requested a pardon on the grounds that he had dedicated his subsequent decades to honest service. Governor Hogg, who had no idea that one of the West's most trusted lawmen had been operating for 16 years under a stolen identity, granted it. Frank Canton was Adjutant General of Oklahoma when he died in 1927. His daughter Ruby said he never slept soundly. He moved houses often, she said, because he always believed that somewhere in the long geography of his 2 lives, in Texas, Wyoming, Alaska, Oklahoma, there was a man who had not forgotten Josiah Horner and was still coming to settle the account. On July 14, 1881, Pat Garrett shot Billy the Kid once in the chest in a darkened room at Fort Sumner, New Mexico, and became the most famous lawman in the country. He was 31 years old. He lived for another 26 years. Almost nobody remembers what happened in them. Garrett did not seek re-election as sheriff of Lincoln County in 1882. The public had begun the work of converting Billy the Kid into a folk hero, which required a corresponding conversion of the man who shot him into something colder and less sympathetic than the record supported. Garrett understood the dynamic and could not find a way to outmaneuver it. He wrote a book, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid, in 1882, attempting to set the record straight. It did not set the record straight. It contained enough errors and self-justifications to give his critics the ammunition they needed. He went to Texas. He ranched near Roswell. He ran unsuccessfully for the state senate. He briefly became a Texas Ranger and left within a month. He returned to New Mexico, took up as sheriff of Doña Ana County, and in 1898 was drawn into the Fountain murder case. Colonel Albert Fountain and his young son Henry had vanished in the White Sands on January 31, 1896, and the investigation led Garrett toward Oliver Lee and Jim Gilliland, ranchers with political connections that made the prosecution as dangerous as the pursuit. On July 12, 1898, Garrett and his posse caught up with the suspects at Wildy Well Ranch. In the gunfight that followed, one of his deputies was shot twice and died on the way to Las Cruces. Garrett was forced to call a truce to get the man medical help. Lee and Gilliland surrendered 8 months later and were acquitted by a jury at trial, represented by Albert Fall. Garrett told a friend in his final years, "Everything seems to go wrong with me." He had been a customs collector in El Paso under Theodore Roosevelt's appointment, had lost the position when a new administration arrived, had returned to ranching, and was in a bitter dispute over a land lease that had consumed the last years of his financial stability. On February 29, 1908, a leap year day which happens once every 4 years and happened once in his life, Garrett was shot in the back of the head while urinating beside a buggy on a road 4 miles east of Las Cruces. A Las Cruces doctor who examined the crime scene determined from the wound angle and position that Garrett had been shot from behind, not in a face-to-face confrontation. Wayne Brazel confessed and claimed self-defense. His attorney was Albert Fall. He was acquitted, many believe, and the circumstantial evidence assembled years later supports the belief that Deacon Jim Miller, the hired killer who charged $600 per contract and wore a steel plate under his coat, had been paid by local rancher W. W. Cox to ensure the outcome of the lease dispute. Whether Miller fired the shot or Brazel did, the organized effort to remove Pat Garrett from the board appears in retrospect to be something considerably more organized than a roadside argument. At 6 feet 5 inches tall, Garrett's body was too long for any finished coffin available in Las Cruces. A special one had to be ordered from El Paso. It arrived in time for a funeral that drew thousands of people who had come finally to pay respects to a man that the public narrative had spent 26 years using as a supporting character in someone else's legend. George Scarborough grew up in Louisiana, moved to Texas, became a cowboy, and was elected sheriff of Jones County, Texas in 1884. He was a methodical man who understood the border country between Texas and Mexico better than most federal officers and who operated in his final years by a method that his own superiors occasionally found difficult to distinguish from the methods of the men he was pursuing. Dropping himself to the level of those he hunted, building relationships inside outlaw networks, then delivering the results without explaining the process. John Wesley Hardin, the most documented killer in the history of the frontier, was shot in the back of the head in the Acme Saloon in El Paso on August 19, 1895, by a constable named John Selman. Scarborough had known and respected a Texas Ranger named Bass Outlaw, who had been shot and killed by Selman's associates in a brawl in April 1894. The relationship between Scarborough and Selman had been deteriorating since. On April 5, 1896, 2 years to the day after Bass Outlaw's death, Scarborough called Selman into the alley behind the Wigwam Saloon. The specifics of what followed are disputed. What is not disputed is that Scarborough shot Selman 4 times and that when officers arrived, no gun was found on Selman's body. A thief was conveniently arrested before trial and claimed to have stolen the weapon from the scene. Scarborough was acquitted and forced to resign his deputy's commission. He moved to Deming, New Mexico and worked as a hired gun for the Grant County Cattlemen's Association, the same institutional arrangement under a different organizational name. That had employed Frank Canton and Tom Horn, and a long line of men whose skill with weapons made them useful to the cattle industry and whose relationship with the law was a matter of ongoing negotiation. On April 1, 1900, Scarborough tracked a pair of outlaws into the Chiricahua Mountains in Arizona. In the gunfight that followed, he killed one man and was shot through the leg. His leg was amputated in Deming. He died 4 days later. On April 5, 1900, exactly 6 years to the day after Bass Outlaw's death, and exactly 4 years to the day after he had shot John Selman. The chain of dates running backward and forward through the same April 5th is either the most precise coincidence in the frontier's recorded history or a reminder that the violence of that world operated on cycles that nobody designed and nobody fully controlled. James B. Hume spent 30 years as Wells Fargo's chief detective and produced in 1885 a report that documented 313 stagecoach robberies, 47 burglaries, and a comprehensive criminal record for every known road agent operating in the Western Territories. He had tracked Black Bart through 8 years and 28 robberies across the California mountains and ultimately identified him through a laundry mark on a handkerchief left at a crime scene. Not through a gunfight, not through an informant's tip, but through the same patient, methodical accumulation of physical evidence that marked everything he did. He was not a man who fired his weapon at close range in dark rooms. He was the man who spent months building the case that made the darkroom encounter unnecessary. He solved the $700,000 Adams Express theft in 1866. He identified and pursued the James Gang after the Gads Hill robbery in 1874, sending Detective Joseph Witcher into Clay County against the explicit warning of a former sheriff. Witcher was dead the next morning, and Hume absorbed the loss and continued. He tracked Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch into South America through intermediaries. His files, assembled across 3 decades cross-referenced by criminal method, physical description, and known associates, were the most comprehensive criminal intelligence archive in the country at a time when no government agency maintained anything comparable. He understood something that the lawmen who worked with guns understood less well. The outlaw who was never caught was not necessarily defeated by a faster draw. He was defeated by the slow, unglamorous, unrelenting work of a man who kept better records and had more patience. Hume died in 1904. He had put more men in prison than any single peace officer in the history of the American West. His name appears in no legend, no dime novel, no folk song. The men he put away are considerably better remembered. The frontier produced lawmen who matched and exceeded every outlaw it produced. In courage, in skill, in the specific willingness to go into country that offered no guarantees and no certainty of return. The difference between the remembered and the forgotten is not a difference in the quality of the work. It is a difference in the quality of the publicity that followed it. The outlaws had dime novels and newspaper editors who turned their stories into legend. The lawmen had warrants and field diaries and the daily grinding anonymous work of bringing men to court in a territory the size of several eastern states with nothing but a horse, a badge, and the specific conviction that the job required doing. Heck Thomas arrested more criminals than Sam Bass ever robbed. Bass Reeves took more men into custody than Jesse James ever held at gunpoint. Pat Garrett lived 26 years after Billy the Kid and filled those years with work that no one bothered to record with the same care they used to record the 14 seconds in a darkened room that preceded them. These were the men the frontier produced, not the ones the legend kept.